Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Imperfectly Better, the podcast that is all about documenting the real-time process of growth, improvement, and change. I am your I am your host, Cody, imperfectly starting off that podcast episode and coming back to you after a hot minute. Yeah, it's been a bit, over a week since I recorded one of these. What had happened after episode 6 was that I had recorded it, listened back to it, and something just felt wrong with it. It sounded too mechanical, too systematic, like a high school essay had been given life and I had read through it. It just sounded mechanical. And do you want to know what the funny irony is? That the realization happened before and while trying to work through the issues so that I could record this episode, which is essentially all about what happens when you spend years trying to figure out the correct script, the correct way to engage in conversation. And yeah, it just took a bit to figure out how I wanted to better present myself so that I could return to that natural presentation, so that it could feel more authentic and honestly easier to work through these episodes. Because as I've said before, my goal is to be able to approach this in a kind of interview style where the questions are presented to me. And in quite a few cases, it was becoming that I really had to write out what I wanted to talk about in order to have good direction, versus now where I'm just speaking by the seat of my pants, apparently. Flying by the seat of my pants, so to put it. But I've been experimenting with giving myself that kind of loose structure, knowing where I'm going without scripting how I'm supposed to get to the end point. And that's kind of how I've redesigned my approach to these podcast episodes. And honestly, feeling good about it. And feeling good with how I'm starting this out right now, even though I goofed the intro. But I'm going to leave that in, because this is a podcast all about being imperfect. So yeah, there you go. But outside of that, before I get into the meat of the episode, I've mainly been enjoying the summer. Getting out for some good hikes, really enjoying the good summer weather before we begin to lose it. And yeah, just spending a lot of time working on some deeper reflections. Some of it will tie into future episodes, but just because I'm working on the podcast and just because I have things that I reflect on and study and work on for Imperfectly Better, it does not mean that I'm neglecting or ignoring the work that I still need to do on myself. But with all of that said, I do understand that with getting back into this and finally getting back into the flow of recording episodes, one thing I just noticed was that it was difficult for me to get back into this, getting back into that flow. And really, I feel like that's just because I'm still struggling with trying to figure out what the voice of this podcast is, or what my presentation style is. And I think that's a good point to go into what this episode is all about, which is going back to the book Life on the Bridge by Kaelynn Partlow. This is the second episode in a 7-episode series that was inspired by that book, inspired by Kaelynn's experiences and knowledge presented in the book. Once again, I'll be including links to that material in the episode description in case you would like to check it out, check out the book, or support her content. After all, she's doing some pretty fantastic work. But back to the topic of this episode, which is something that you might have heard that a lot of autistic people struggle with, and that is social situations. And for me, that was no different. I will say, growing up, I tended to troubleshoot and adapt my way into social situations, mainly because I had a lot of exposure to that. But the one area where I did always have some difficulty figuring things out was dating. I struggled a lot with dating, mainly because I did not understand things. There were times where I asked for help, or really I asked for advice. So a big example that jumps out to me is back when I was in my middle school, high school years, still screwing up occasionally. I had the romantic, socially competent, and genius idea to dedicate a jazz trombone solo to somebody that I had a crush on, which, yeah, that totally would have worked. That totally would have taken off like a lead balloon filled with mercury. And at the time, I did not understand it. At the time, I just thought that, I was trying to be cool. I was trying to show that I was interested in the other person. I was trying to do something cool. But when I asked somebody about this, somebody that I had trusted and was really looking for guidance, the advice that I had gotten back was not that. And when I asked, okay, well, what should I do then? Like, I'm interested in this person and I want to show that I'm interested. I would like for things to go good. I would like to not fail or screw up in this situation. And I was told just not that. As if that immediately fixed things. In my mind, all that did was that it eliminated one path out of 1,000 different possibilities. So I did not understand that the teenage romantic comedy scale of the gesture was not something I should do. That was not something that was present in normal dating. Normal dating itself is very normal, very friendship-based and building friendship. It's about interest, reciprocity, trust, and building that friendship connection. But that was just one area of my life that I probably struggled with the most. But it doesn't mean that there weren't other areas that I struggled with. There's a way that I describe being autistic, especially what I experienced in elementary and middle school. It's that being autistic felt like you were in a play where everybody else had their scripts except for you, and you had to figure out what your script was. And the other way that it felt was that the script would constantly get revised. It would change. And for me, every time it felt like I finally figured things out, or I thought I had an understanding of what was considered socially good, like what would result in good outcomes, what would result in bad outcomes. Every time I took one step forward, it felt like the world took two. So oftentimes, it would result in me building this rule set for myself based off of mistakes. So each mistake or failure gave me another rule, another line, or really just a road and path to avoid going down. And for me, that just made social situations feel more difficult because I would often study or try to figure out what the correct reply is, that I would study and research and then copy what worked elsewhere. But when things just weren't coming up in conversation that I was familiar with, then I would go quiet when it felt like things were risky, but obviously I wanted to talk, and eventually it's like things would bubble up and burst out. And sometimes there would be thought behind it, other times it would be me just trying to not feel lesser, not feel smaller. And dating became the main testing ground for this, as far as openers, planned paths, predictions, and best responses that were designed to try and get me through the world of dating. And while those scripts did reduce uncertainty and they helped give me ideas for how to get into conversation or what would be good openers and topics to explore. Like, I really like talking about nature. I really like talking about podcasts. When it came to video games, I could talk a whole ton about Pokemon, Legend of Zelda, my days back in middle school playing Halo with my friends. I could talk about all sorts of things around that. So there are ways that it helped me, but the problem is, and here's the problem, the script wasn't static. Everybody else could say whatever they wanted. And because everybody else could say whatever they wanted, and because I was terrible with prediction, it essentially meant that any interaction could go off the rails. And made it so much harder for me to feel like I could easily get into that or do it in a way where I truly felt natural. The funniest visual that comes to mind for me here is Star Trek The Next Generation, where Commander Data creates the small talk subroutine, and he's in the turbo lift with Captain Picard. And he and Picard are standing there, and Data just suddenly goes, "It has been quite a day, has it not?" And Picard looks at him like, yes, it has. Like, just looking at Data like, what the heck is going on here? Because Data begins to talk about how it is that, a change of routine is often invigorating and can be a welcome diversion after a long assignment. Picard is like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? And realizes that Data is trying to do small talk. But that's what it felt like, is not really feeling like I was natural, but simultaneously that if I somehow figured out all of the rules, how everything goes, how everything is supposed to be, then I could finally get these social situations right. Now, eventually I did reach a point where conversation and connection did get a lot easier for me, where I could be more open and authentic in the way that I talk with other people. But more importantly, I was able to get away from the idea of there being a script. I like the idea of improv now. But it's interesting to think about how I got to this point. And Kaelynn, in her book, actually has a really good visual for this, where she talks about the concept of flying dolphins and how it can be that an autistic person can have a lot to say about conversations, socializing, people, language, what all of that means. So, in a universe where you could teach a dolphin how to fly an airplane, they would have a lot to say, and they would be very knowledgeable on the concept of flight versus something like a bird, where if you asked a bird about it, they wouldn't really have much to say because it's something that they've been naturally doing throughout their whole life. And much like in that universe, where the path from dolphins first sitting in the cockpit of an airplane and finally taking flight, the amount of times they would crash and burn could put SpaceX rockets to shame. And likewise, I did learn a lot through failure. I would repeatedly troubleshoot things. I would reflect on what went right, what went wrong. And just to be clear, that struggle alone did not create insight. Like me face planting over and over and over again, like in the episode of SpongeBob where he has his shoes untied and he keeps trying to deliver a Krabby Patty to Squidward and just keeps going smack, 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 smack. That wasn't what finally made me competent. What made me competent was being introspective having that reflection process and being able to treat those failures, being able to treat what happened as data, even being able to treat my own perspectives, my own beliefs, going into those situations and coming out as data to reflect on. And it's through all of that that I was able to gain a better ability of natural conversation, much like a flying dolphin, once they stop crashing airplanes, would be able to talk quite a bit about flight mechanics, aerodynamics, and what it means to fly. And so, what did change for me regarding communication, social situations, or even dating over the years as I learned to take flight, so to say? The first was that I let go of the need to understand, or at least preemptively know, so many things. Essentially, to stop spending so much prep time preparing for all sorts of possible conversations, and instead just talk as me, be me. Notice the other person and what they're saying, where it is that their passion seems to be drawing towards, or where their interest is drawing towards. Any conversation, social interaction, or even a date that you're on is something where the script is being actively created with the other person. And you can't control the other person. You can't pick how it is that they're going to respond or what they're going to say. Letting go of those expectations and to stop trying to predict or think of what the best answer or best response is going to be allows you to speak based on what it is that jumps out to you. Maybe they say something that catches your attention, or maybe they talk about something that you know nothing about. It's okay to not know something, or to not really understand a topic that somebody is presenting to you. Like, say that somebody you're talking to is talking about marine biology, and they bring up something about whale migration patterns that you do not understand. That is an opportunity for you to say, "Well, I don't know about that. Could you tell me more?" That is an opportunity for you to learn more, for you to take in more. I had a conversation with someone recently like this. Not about whale migration patterns, but about scents and what different kinds of cologne are designed to do, and how it is that the choices in what goes into a cologne can determine how long it lasts on your skin, or even how the placement of it on your body can leave different impacts on people. So for me, one of the big things that I learned in that situation was that applying it to the back of my neck, the back of my kneecaps, makes it so that when I walk past people or when I hug people, they get that scent, which I never even thought of until I was in that conversation, admitted that I didn't know a ton about colognes or scents or really how those worked outside of finding a scent profile that I really liked, which is H. Habibi, by the way. It's a Middle Eastern inspired cologne line where it's light floral tones, really warm bass notes, and oh my God, it just smells like a warm summer oasis. I love wearing those smells. But I learned something new from being able to admit that I didn't really know a ton about that area of perfumes, colognes, and body scents. That's the value in being able to let go of the need to have an objective with social situations or trying to track conversations and figure out, oh, here's the best response, or here's the best question to ask, or here's the direction this conversation should go in. Just drop all of that. You don't need to think about all of that. The purpose of conversation and connection is to connect with people. And the more that you're in your head trying to strategize, trying to think about what to do, the more that you're not able to connect, the more that you're spending time not connecting. And that's not to say that I discarded everything that I learned, everything that I studied and gained over time in my quest to figure out social situations, in my quest to make dating easier, to not screw up so much. It's just that it all became integrated enough with me that it's no longer one of those things that I actively think about. I essentially practiced to the point where it became experience versus something that I have to think about. So natural does not mean effortless, perfect, or universal. After all, group conversations and sudden changes in direction can still be difficult for me, and I think for a variety of people, group conversations can be difficult, mainly due to trying to keep track of a bunch of things all at once. I mean, could you imagine what baseball would be like where if you didn't have one pitcher that the batter had to keep track of, there were 5 pitchers just positioned at different points in the field, and any one of them could throw a ball at any time. But there was still the 3-strike system. That would be pretty miserable. Which makes me happy that conversation doesn't really feel like that. Otherwise, friendship would be miserable. Speaking of uncertainty in baseball pitchers, that is probably the biggest thing that has helped me overall is being able to embrace the uncertainty of social situations, being able to accept the unknown. Now, with my ability to talk and communicate now, it doesn't mean that every social situation is sunshine and rainbows now. No, I still deal with my fair share of struggles. I still deal with the occasional person where things either feel dense or like there's a lot of friction, a lot of blockage in that flow, that natural flow where it feels like it is easy to talk to the other person, regardless of what it is that you're talking about. Or the other person may just feel difficult, and that can make it hard to talk to that person. And yet you feel like you still need to be there. And that is another thing that I'm learning about too, is the importance of your own boundaries in social conversations and being willing to recognize when you're either not feeling it or boundaries are being crossed. For me, I struggled with being able to assert myself, all because I wanted to keep the peace, all because I didn't want to be rude. And that would lead to issues, all because I couldn't communicate that, all because in those situations where I should stand my ground, I was a pushover. So there are still areas in which I am learning. I'm not perfect, as the name of this podcast makes plainly clear. I still learn, but my ability to be natural, my ability to flow, feels good. And while there are days where taking to that stage, improv feels a little harder than it normally does, when I take flight, usually I don't have to worry about crashing and burning. And as a flying dolphin, that's a pretty good feeling to have. And that is everything that I have to share for this episode. I will say it felt good to talk like this. With this new episode approach, this fixed episode approach, then again, can I ever say it's really fixed? There will always be some way to make this better. But I will say that I really do feel like I figured out things since episode 6, since the last episode. This did not feel mechanical to do. It did not feel scripted or like I had written an essay and then presented things back. This felt natural. I liked this. I liked recording this episode. And it's honestly gotten me excited again to move on to the next episode. And that was something that was missing with a couple of the last episodes that I recorded, which really does go to show the importance, and tying into the theme of this episode, of being able to speak openly, authentically, and naturally. Being able to let yourself flow without that restriction, without that feeling of things being pre-planned, of thinking your way through the words, and instead being able to speak from the heart. And honestly, it is like a heart feeling. When I talk, it doesn't feel like the words that I'm usually speaking are coming from the head. It feels like they are coming straight from the center of my chest. And that makes it really easy for me to be able to speak this way. I think this episode has given me a few things to think about, especially in regards to having that enthusiasm back to record podcast episodes, to work through podcast episodes. Now that I figured out what those friction and tension points were. But that's something for another day. And right now, it's a beautiful day outside, and I would love to get down to the beach for some steps, maybe wade in the water for a bit, and enjoy this beautiful day. If you liked this episode, I would love and appreciate it if you followed the podcast wherever you are listening, or left a like, shared it with a friend who you think would love the podcast as well, or post it to wherever you want. Reviews are also nice and appreciated, no matter what they are. I always love receiving feedback, and I have gotten quite a bit of feedback for the podcast, so thank you to those who continue to do so. I really do appreciate you, and I do try to take your feedback into mind. I do have a link both in the episode description and on my website for Imperfectly Better that allows you to submit your own feedback, or say there's a question you would like me to answer, something you would like me to explore. Hey, maybe you have a recommendation for me. Episode 5 and episode 4 were both based on a podcast episode recommendation that I had received from a listener. So, if you got any sort of recommendation for me to check out, as long as it's appropriate, I will look into it. And who knows, I might make an episode on it, as long as it's something I can talk about on the podcast. And with that, I think this is a good point to say farewell. Have a wonderful day. Bye.